Clint Eastwood forced an entire town to paint itself blood red and rename it Hell. What this terrifying scene reveals about collective guilt will haunt you forever. In 1973, Clint Eastwood directed and starred in one of the darkest, most unsettling westerns ever made. High Plains Drifter wasn't just another revenge tale. It was a supernatural nightmare wrapped in the skin of a traditional western, and at its center was one of the most visually shocking and symbolically powerful scenes in cinema history: the transformation of an entire town into a literal vision of hell. The film opens with a stranger riding into the small mining town of Lago. He has no name, no past that anyone can trace. He's just a figure in a duster coat, riding out of a desert heat shimmer like something conjured from the town's worst nightmares. The townspeople of Lago are nervous. 3 outlaws are about to be released from prison, and these aren't ordinary criminals. Years ago, these men worked for the mining company that controlled Lago. When Marshal Jim Duncan discovered the company was mining on government land illegally, he threatened to report them. The mining company hired these 3 outlaws to kill the marshal, and they did it in the most brutal way imaginable. On a bright afternoon in the middle of town, while every citizen of Lago watched, the 3 outlaws tied Marshal Jim Duncan to a post and whipped him to death. The marshal screamed for help. He begged his neighbors, the people he'd protected, to intervene. But nobody moved. Nobody said a word. The store owners, the hotel manager, the barber, the preacher, they all stood and watched as a good man was murdered in front of them. Why didn't they help? Because helping would have meant opposing the mining company. It would have meant risking their livelihoods, their safety, their comfortable existence. So they made a choice. They chose silence. They chose cowardice. And they told themselves it wasn't their fault. Now, years later, those 3 killers are coming back, and the town is terrified. They need protection, but they don't deserve it. That's when the stranger rides in. At first, the townspeople think they're lucky. This mysterious gunfighter seems capable, dangerous, exactly what they need. They offer him anything he wants if he'll protect them from the returning outlaws. The stranger accepts their offer, but his price is strange. He doesn't want money. He wants something else entirely. He wants them to paint the town. The request seems odd, but harmless enough. Maybe he's eccentric. Maybe he has his reasons. The townspeople agree. They'll paint the town if that's what it takes to have his protection. But when they ask what color he wants, his answer chills them to the bone. Red. Every building, every surface, blood red. The stranger doesn't explain. He doesn't justify. He simply tells them to start painting, and because they're desperate, because they're terrified of the returning killers, they obey. What happens next is one of the most surreal and disturbing sequences ever filmed in a Western. The townspeople begin painting. At first, they're hesitant, confused by the strange request, but the stranger watches them, and something in his presence, something cold and knowing, makes them continue. They paint the church red, the hotel red, the saloon, the general store, the livery stable, all of it transformed into shades of crimson and scarlet. As they work, the town begins to change, not just physically, but atmospherically. What was once a typical Western town, sun-bleached and dusty, becomes something alien and nightmarish. The red buildings stand out against the desert landscape like an open wound, like a stain that can't be washed away. Then the stranger makes his second demand. He wants them to change the town's name. They're no longer to call it Lago. From now on, the town's name is Hell. The townspeople are horrified. They protest. They argue. But the stranger's response is cold and simple. It's what you made it. And in that moment, they begin to understand. This isn't about protection. This isn't about the returning outlaws. This is about something much deeper, much more terrible. The stranger knows what they did. He knows about Marshal Duncan. He knows they watched a good man die and did nothing to stop it. The painting of the town red isn't random decoration. It's blood. It's the blood of Jim Duncan, the marshal they let die. Every red building is a reminder of their guilt, their complicity, their sin. And renaming the town Hell isn't metaphorical, it's literal. Through their cowardice, through their silence, They transformed their home into hell. The stranger is simply making visible what was always true. As the painting continues, something fascinating happens among the townspeople. They begin to fracture. Some continue painting mechanically, trying not to think about what it means. Others start to break down, the weight of their buried guilt finally surfacing. The preacher, who watched a man die without offering spiritual comfort or intervention, can barely hold his brush steady. The hotel owner, who stood on his porch and watched the whipping without moving, paints with shaking hands. But there are others who remain defiant. The town's leaders, the ones who made the deal with the mining company in the first place, refuse to accept what the stranger is making them confront. They insist they had no choice. They claim they were protecting the town's interests. They argue that one man's life wasn't worth risking everything they'd built. The stranger doesn't argue with them. He doesn't need to. The red paint speaks for itself. One of the most powerful aspects of this scene is its silence. There's very little dialogue during the painting sequence. Instead, Clint Eastwood as director lets the images speak. We see faces. We see hands holding brushes, applying red paint to wood that will never be clean again. We see the town transformed, building by building, into something out of a nightmare. The cinematography emphasizes the unnaturalness of what's happening. The camera lingers on the red buildings against the blue desert sky. It's beautiful in a terrible way, like a wound, like blood on sand. The color doesn't belong in a Western. It's too vivid, too aggressive, too honest. And that's exactly the point. Westerns traditionally dealt in clear moral lines. There were good guys and bad guys, heroes wore white hats, villains wore black. But High Plains Drifter, and particularly this scene, destroys that simplicity. The townspeople aren't villains in the traditional sense. They're not outlaws or killers. They're ordinary people who made one terrible choice, and that choice stained everything that came after. The stranger forcing them to paint the town red is an act of psychological warfare. He's making them live inside their guilt. He's making them walk streets the color of the blood they allowed to be spilled. He's making them see, every moment of every day, what they really are. There's a theological dimension to this scene that can't be ignored. The renaming of the town to hell is explicitly religious imagery. In Christian theology, hell is both a place and a state of being. It's the separation from grace, the consequence of sin, the inability to escape the weight of what you've done. By renaming Lago as hell, the stranger is making a theological argument. This town, through its collective sin, through its choice to watch evil happen and do nothing, has separated itself from grace. They've created their own hell, not through dramatic evil, but through passive complicity. The preacher in the town understands this better than anyone. There's a scene where he confronts the stranger, asking him who he really is. The stranger's response is ambiguous, but the implication is clear. He might be the ghost of Marshal Duncan, or he might be something else, an angel of vengeance, a supernatural force of justice, or perhaps the embodiment of the town's collective guilt made manifest. The beauty and terror of High Plains Drifter is that it never answers this question definitively. Clint Eastwood deliberately leaves the stranger's identity mysterious. But in the context of the Red Town, the Hell Town, the ambiguity works perfectly. It doesn't matter if he's a ghost or an avenger or a psychological projection. What matters is what he represents. The impossibility of escaping your sins, the way guilt transforms everything it touches. As the painting nears completion, the visual impact becomes overwhelming. The entire town, every structure, every surface, is now various shades of red. In the harsh desert sunlight, it looks like the buildings are bleeding. At sunset, the red deepens to the color of dried blood. At night, lit by lamplight, the town looks like something from a fever dream. The townspeople move through this transformed space like ghosts themselves. They've been forced to confront what they are, and it's broken something in many of them. The comfortable lies they told themselves, that they had no choice, that it wasn't their responsibility, that they were just protecting their interests, have been stripped away by the simple act of painting their world the color of guilt. There's a particular moment in the film where a woman stands in the middle of the red street, turns in a slow circle, and begins to cry. She's surrounded by red buildings under a blue sky, and the visual contrast is stunning. But more than that, her breakdown represents something universal, the moment when denial becomes impossible, when you can no longer avoid seeing what you've become. The stranger watches all of this with a cold, impassive expression. He doesn't gloat. He doesn't lecture. He simply observes as the town's transformation, both physical and psychological, completes itself. This restraint makes him even more terrifying. He's not angry in a human way. He's something else, something that operates on a different level of justice. When the three outlaws finally arrive, they ride into a town they no longer recognize. The Lago they left is gone, replaced by this red nightmare. And in a brilliant twist, the psychological transformation of the town has prepared the way for the stranger's actual plan. The townspeople, broken by guilt and fear, are no longer capable of the unified resistance that might have saved them. They've been forced to confront their cowardice, and that confrontation has paralyzed them. The final confrontation between the stranger and the three outlaws happens in this red hell. The symbolism is perfect. Violence begets violence, blood calls for blood, and the town that allowed murder must become the stage for more death. The stranger kills the three men, but there's no triumph in it. Justice has been served, but it's a dark, terrible justice that offers no comfort. After the outlaws are dead, the stranger prepares to leave. The townspeople, now fully aware of what they've become and what they've lost, watch him go. And here's where Clint Eastwood delivers one of the most haunting endings in Western history. As the stranger rides out of town, he passes the cemetery. There's a fresh grave marker there with a name, Marshal Jim Duncan. The town's dwarf gravedigger, one of the few characters who showed moral clarity throughout the film, is standing there. He asks the stranger, "I never did know your name." The stranger replies, "Yes, you do," and rides away into the same heat shimmer he emerged from. The implication is clear and terrifying. The stranger might be Jim Duncan's ghost, returned to make the town face what it did. Or he might be Duncan's spirit of vengeance. Or he might be something even more abstract, the personification of guilt itself, the psychological weight of sin made manifest. But regardless of what the stranger literally is, the red town remains. The paint doesn't wash off, the name doesn't change back. Hell stays hell because that's what the town made itself when it chose silence over action, comfort over courage, self-interest over justice. The genius of Clint Eastwood's direction in this scene, and in the film as a whole, is that it operates on multiple levels simultaneously. On the surface, it's a supernatural Western revenge story. Dig deeper, and it's a meditation on collective guilt and moral responsibility. Go deeper still, and it's a theological exploration of sin, judgment, and the impossibility of redemption without acknowledgement. The Red Town works as a visual metaphor, but it also works as psychological realism. When communities commit sins, when they allow injustice to happen, when they prioritize comfort over courage, when they choose silence in the face of evil, they do transform themselves. Maybe not literally into red buildings, but into something just as stained, just as marked. The scene has lost none of its power in the 50 years since the film was released. If anything, it's become more relevant. In an era of increased awareness about bystander responsibility, about the consequences of silence in the face of injustice, about how systems of oppression require the passive participation of ordinary people, High Plains Drifter's Red Hell feels unnervingly contemporary. The film asks us uncomfortable questions. What would we have done if we were in that town square when Marshal Duncan was being killed? Would we have intervened? Would we have spoken up? Or would we have stood silent, protecting our interests, telling ourselves it wasn't our responsibility? And if we chose silence, what color would we paint our world to acknowledge that choice? The Red Town in High Plains Drifter is one of cinema's most powerful images because it's both literal and metaphorical, both specific and universal. It's about a particular town's particular sin, but it's also about all of us, about how guilt changes everything it touches, about how silence in the face of evil transforms us into something we might not recognize. Clint Eastwood forced his characters to paint their town red and rename it Hell. In doing so, he created a scene that continues to haunt viewers decades later, a visual representation of moral truth that can't be escaped or denied. The paint might be fictional, but the truth it represents, that communities are defined by what they're willing to watch happen, is as real as blood on sand, as permanent as guilt, as inescapable as the color red under an unforgiving desert sun. If this analysis of one of cinema's most powerful scenes moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Share this video with someone who appreciates films that challenge and disturb. What would you do if you witnessed injustice? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to ring that notification bell for more deep dives into the darkest and most meaningful moments in film history.